All right, welcome to video 2 for Combat in Orlando Darkened, which is combat for non-combat characters. In the first video, we covered how the combat system works. The 30-second reminder on that's different from rules as written is we don't use initiative. So it's all players act, all bad guys act, consequences occur, bonus rounds. Now, the big thing about being a non-combat character is that you absolutely can and should go to combat scenes. One, it is unlikely that you're going to lose your character as a result. The ST staff knows who our non-combat characters are, and we're not going to go swing the big crazy giant, werewolf of doom at the utterly investigative non-combat character. So there's a meta level of the STs. Even if something like that does happen, this is your reminder in our errata that we have what we call a death save, which is not in the rules as written, unless you're in Werewolf. Werewolf has their own mechanics for this. A death save basically just says, hey, your character's died, except that sucks. Unless you're done with their story. It sucks, so we're not doing it. So a death save is you have taken fatal damage, you spend a permanent willpower, which is relatively cheap experience point-wise to recover, and you are passed out and done with combat, basically, for good or ill. You can't help your friends, but nor are the enemies going to go and, kick your unconscious body to death. This opens up some opportunities for really good story, because with that death save, we're going to figure out some kind of scar or disfigurement or something. You've got this really cool story. It opens up the option for heroics of people carrying you out, yada yada. But the focus of this video is going to be on the stuff to do if you are that non-combatant character. And again, I'm going to use the dice as sort of a physical way to express what we're doing, although we're more talking about difficulty numbers in this video than we are talking about actual dice pools. So, again, we have our 20-something dice here. The first big thing to note if you're a non-combatant that gets into a combat scene because your group gets ambushed or whatever, is just to remember that dodging is a thing that can happen. Dodging is whatever your dexterity is. Most people have an average dexterity of about 3. And then it's your athletics. If you don't have athletics, it is worth it to buy at least a couple dots of it, just to represent hey, I know how to move in a fight. Because again, the advantage of dodging, we talked a little bit this in the last video, is if you don't get hit at all, we don't ever have to worry about a soak roll. We don't ever have to worry about how much damage was done. Because for every success you get on your dexterity athletics, it subtracts 1 from everyone else's. As a general rule, what I've found is, and this is, don't math check me on this one, the average number of successes to hit is usually about 3, give or take. It's a little more if you're a werewolf and rolling a gigantic dice pool. It's a little less if you're a non-combat character trying to hit something. But the average shakes out to be about 2 or 3 successes. In the various combats we've run, most folks have rolled over 2 or 3 dice to their damage pools. Well, if you can get, number one, even if you don't detract all of their successes, you significantly reduce the amount of damage you take, because again, you're detracting away from those I hit them really hard dice. If you can negate all of their successes, you have wasted the enemy's turn. They don't get to hit you again unless they have bonus rounds, and complete whiff. Now, base difficulty for things is 6, right? And again, we're going to use dice to represent that, right? So here's our base difficulty. Interestingly, this is standard. The universe thinks this is a reasonably difficult task. You know, tying your shoe is a difficulty 1. You know, doing something easy is a difficulty 3. Doing something difficult is difficulty 9. So if you are trying to dodge someone punching you or using a sword or what have you, melee attacks are easier to dodge. You can see them coming as I throw dice on the floor. The only problem with that is that firearms attacks are harder to dodge, right? Dodging a bullet is not exactly how this works. So if you're in a situation where it's hand-to-hand combat, realize that it is generally easier to dodge, right? Difficulty 5. Versus if you're in a firearms fight, in which case, like, leave. Which brings us also to the idea of cover. So one of the things that you can do as a non-combatant character, just to make it harder for you to be hit, is take cover. Talk to your storyteller about like what's going on. And even if we're talking, you know, you're trying to dodge firearms, the advantage of taking cover is that you're not dodging. You are just making their shot harder. So standard difficulty to hit something is 6. Someone who is in light cover makes that difficulty 7, right? Someone who is in medium cover makes it 8, and someone who is in heavy cover, right? The only thing sticking out is like, you know, you're popping your head around to look, to cast magic or do something. Now, before we ever factor magical shields or gifts or anything of that nature, that shooter's difficulty is a 9. Now, just to give you an easy, like, let's look at, you know, percentages here. That means you're only being hit 20% of the time on each die. That is significantly unlikely. This brings us into the idea of thresholds, right? And if you can get your defense up into thresholds, aside from someone that is just statted to hit, you become almost untouchable. I say almost because statistically it can happen. Here's what a threshold is. Let's imagine for a moment that you are in full cover, right? The base difficulty to shoot you is a 9. And let's imagine for a moment that you have a magic shield of some kind, Luna's armor or Force's shield or whatever. Or just like regular armor, whatever. So you're in cover and you're shielded. And that shield provides you a +3 to be hit. Here's the idea of thresholds. We have that first +1 here that says now to be hit, they need to roll a 10. You are only being hit 10% of the time per die, basically. What a threshold is that for every like bonus +1, they now need an extra success to even hit you the first time before we worry about I hit them really well dice. So as an example, right, if you're at this sort of a number, it is difficulty 10 with a threshold of 2, and I only roll 1 success to hit you, I miss. If I roll 2 successes to hit you, I still miss. I need to roll 3 successes just to connect. And it's only if I roll a 4th success does this die get to go to damage. Which means now, remember I said earlier, most people are hitting on an average of, I hit it with 2 or 3 successes. Anything less than that, anything that would be like a grazing hit, and it's a complete whiff. So the goal here is you want to stack your modifiers, get into cover, have protective shielding, and now it doesn't matter that you're kind of a squishy target, it's just that flipping hard to hit you. Okay, Last thing to talk about before we get into some weeds is what's called desperate defense. So normally when you are rolling your dex athletics to dodge something, you're dealing with like one person. For whatever reason, if you are surrounded by enemies, whether they're sort of crunchy enemies, you know, they've only got 4 health levels and they're meant to be like swarms, or whether they're, you know, bosses, you have what are called the desperate defense rules, which basically says, I don't want to die today. And so you take your dex athletics, and again, let's imagine that's a pool of 5, because again, that's kind of low, and we're dealing with non-combat characters. And the way a desperate defense works is that not only do you roll your dex athletics to dodge against everybody, which you don't normally do, right? A dodge is like, I'm dodging you, or I'm dodging you. Declaring a desperate defense says, I'm dodging everybody. I am doing nothing but trying to not get hit. And how that works is that you roll your dex athletics against everybody who's trying to hit you, whether it's 2 bad guys or 5. And then after the first one, so guy number 1, we roll all 5 dice. Guy number 2, we roll 4. Guy number 3, we roll 3. And we keep, for each person, subtracting 1. Now, obviously, this means, as a strategy moment, if you're going to do this, you want to roll your main desperate defense against whatever's going to do the most damage to you, and hope that by the time you've only got 1 die left, that, you know, it's a crunchy that does a couple of lethal, right? It doesn't hit very hard. Once you're out of dodge dice, perhaps obviously you cannot dodge anymore. So, in summary, dodging is a thing, dexterity plus athletics. Desperate defense, where you're sort of dodging everybody, is a thing. And then taking cover increases the difficulty of someone to shoot you, is whether that's with a magical attack, whether that's firearms, whatever. A little bit less effective in terms of melee. For mage in specific, and to be fair, this is true for the other venues, as there are counterspell and counter magic rules for all the venues. For mage, one of the things that you can always do as a non-combat character when you are dealing with mage antagonists is counter magic. Counter magic says, I'm going to take my arete, and I'm going to wait till you go cast something. And I'm going to roll my arete against a difficulty of 8. And if I get more successes than you do, I just stopped your spell and wasted your turn. Oh, Mr. Bad Guy Evil, you know, Nefandi. Just saying that might be important soon. Just going to put that out there. So being a non-combatant character in cover, shielded, spending your turn doing counter magic is a thing, and it is super useful, because anytime you can take the, you know, the boss strike, the master strike kind of attack that does, you know, 7 ag, and be like, yeah, nah, not this round. That is a force multiplier for freeing up your team. Your healer can now do something else, or catch up on the healing curve. Your combatant characters don't have to worry about dodging, right? They can devote their full dice pool to attacking. Being the token counterspeller is vitally useful. So that's sort of mage specific. There are rules for other venues to do counter magic, but it's kind of hard. Countering awakened magic is like super difficult, and you can't really counter a gift or a discipline in you know, the other venues. You know, and Tremirathon counter magic has their own rules. Okay, so now here's the best part about being a non-combatant in a combat scene. And I call this how to be a right proper nuisance. Just because you cannot do damage to the boss does not mean you cannot be of use in a combat scene. 1, there's our counter magic option. 2, there's any kind of immediate shielding effects. The one that immediately comes to mind is during the first fight with the soldier demon. he used a spirit gift called Terrorize, which basically said, hey, everybody, make a willpower challenge at difficulty 9. And if you fail it, good luck. You're going to sit out the rest of the fight. And we had, I think it was Callie, who has mind, and was basically like popping mind shields at people to counteract those effects and get them back in the fight. So before we get into the how to be a right proper nuisance, there's that kind of countering and checking whatever the boss does. Now, how to be a pain in the storyteller's butt for running combat. The magical word here is modifiers. Base difficulty to do anything is 6. That's your average difficulty. And as a general rule, things can be modified as much as 3 up or as much as 3 down, right? Which means if you can do something in the scene that gives your allies a benefit, you make it super easier for them. They hit harder, they do more damage, the fight goes faster. You are now what's called a force multiplier. If you can do something that makes it harder for the bosses or the crunchies or the minions or whatever, now your team gets hit less and takes less damage, which frees up other mitigator characters or healing characters to do other things. So let's talk about some easy modifiers, and these are in most of the rule books. If you have any power or can do something in the scene to blind the opponent, everything they do is now +2 difficulty. And they cannot dodge, block, or parry. So let's imagine for a moment you're dealing with a bad guy that's super agile and just is dodging everything left, right, and center. And we blind them, right? We can make things too bright for them or cast an illusion or whatever. And now they're blind. Well, now you get kind of 2 effects. It's easier for them to be hit because they can't dodge. They're relying on soak only. And now it's harder for them to hit, meaning your team gets hit less. If you can do something to trip them, right, just to sort of tie them up for a round, right, throw something at their legs, use an art or gift or power or whatever to trip them up. If you can do something to trip them, they are immobilized for 1 round. An immobilized character is easier to hit. Someone hitting an immobilized character takes 2 away from their difficulty, and now they hit on 4s on average, right? Let's imagine for a moment that Nyx is in this fight, right? Nyx's precast always says, I hit 3 less, right? So let's sort of do the math here for a moment. Difficulty to hit is 6. Let's imagine they have armor, okay? So now our difficulty hit is 9. That's a problem. Well, Nyx says, I can hit you regardless. So we're back to average. And then that non-combat character trips them for a round. And, oh yeah, they use martial arts, right? So their base difficulty is 5. So now that non-combatant trips them for a round. And now we're hitting on 3s. Like, that's huge. We went from 9 to 3 between 1 effect, a martial arts technique, and having a support character do support things. Now, if you can do something to bind them, right? Immobilized is a condition that lasts 1 round, right? You trip them, they're immobilized for the round, everyone gets a sucker punch in. They get back up, they carry on. If you can do something to hold them, to stop them moving, to immobilize them in some fashion, psychic attacks or plant control or just whatever. Once they are immobilized, like held permanently, we don't roll anything to attack that bad guy. they are hit automatically. Allow me to do some examples about why that is huge. I'm going to take an average combat pool. Let's even say it's a combat character, so it's probably above average. Okay, 7 dice to hit. And they are hitting with, let's just say a sword, right? So they have a dexterity of 4 and a melee of 3, or vice versa, whatever. And so now they hit this thing for full blast. Because it can't dodge, it's just an automatic hit. They don't have to roll. So let's look at how bad that is. Someone hitting with a sword hits with their strength plus the weapon plus however many dice extra they have for hitting them really well. Well, we automatically succeeded on all of those dice. So we now have 3, 6, 10, 12 dice towards damage. That's a lot, right? So anything that you can do in a combat to temporarily immobilize an opponent makes it harder for them to, makes it easier for them to be hit. And if you can permanently immobilize them, a hold, a bind, whatever, everyone gets free hits. And the damage gets kind of stupid. The last thing I want to talk about is basically mob mentality and swarm attacks. And I tend to not use these with crunchies, but it's a really good tactic for dealing with bosses. So let's imagine we have our boss character, and our boss is fighting one person. Sucks to be that person because, like, our boss is hitting at full strength. Now, after the first person, we start dealing with what's called mob rules. The minute there are other people, and they don't even really have to be doing anything besides, like, getting in the way and going booga 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 booga. If they're trying to hit, like, even better. But it can literally just be, I'm going to get in the way and make myself a nuisance. Now, in addition to any other modifiers that are going on because of being blinded or immobilized or I hit you really well magic, or it's harder for you to hit me magic, or whatever, this person takes a +1 to their attack rolls and their defense rolls for every person that's swarming them. So let's again kind of do some math here for a moment. Base difficulty for the bad guy to hit you is 6. You have magic that says it's 3 harder to hit me. Go roll 9s. Let's imagine that's all we've got at the moment. Our combat character is fighting them, and either we have 2 or 3 other combat characters, or we have non-combat characters just getting in the way. And now we add 4 more difficulty to that. So again, that puts it to 10 with a threshold of 3. So in order for this bad guy to hit anyone, they need to roll a minimum of 3 successes before we even consider, did you hit? 3 successes is the minimum bar to enter, just because everyone's mobbing them and it's hard to move. My folks who do fencing or any kind of fighting themselves know how hard it is to move when you've got people right up on you, and whether you're trying to hit them or they're trying to hit you, it's just a pain in the butt to move. So let's even add, we've done something to blind this character. Now our threshold is 5 before we even care if they hit you. All of these things sort of add up to a cumulative effect. In video games, we call this type of thinking a force multiplier. The advantage of a force multiplier is that you're not relying on them to do damage. You're relying on them to let the damage dealers do damage, to make it easier for the damage dealers to hit and make it harder for the boss to hit back. That role plays a vital position in this type of combat also. We tend to see it in video game mentality, that idea of having a tank, a healer, DPS, damage mitigation abilities, things like that. But in terms of tabletop games, that is where the non-combat characters become incredibly useful, is by making your modifiers better and their modifiers worse. All while taking cover and having a magical shield so that if something does try to hit them, good luck. So, our next video is going to be about the social role mechanics, which I don't feel like a whole lot of people have a solid grasp on. We don't use them that often, truth be told, but when we do use them, if you're not prepared for them, it can kind of mess with you. So, thank you for coming, and have fun being a right proper nuisance in the middle of a fight.